Before we get started, just a quick reminder that our producer, Monday Abuh's poetry collection called Puri, is now out for sale. Check it out in the link in the description.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Daily Wisdom Words Podcast, where each week we talk to folks who have stories, advice, and life hacks, all of which take you one step closer to that feeling of hope. I'm your co-host Neil Torelli, and today you might notice that my co-host Reenie O'Dea is not with us. She had a little bit of a medical emergency, so she's getting checked out, but we wish her well. Get well soon, Reenie. We can't wait to have you back. So this week we are joined by somebody that I've been looking forward to talking to for so long. And he's founder of the organization Positive Masculinity, author of the book by the same name, radio host, first transgender person ever to be on a ballot in Washington State, and so many other things, which I'm sure we'll get into. Scotty McGregor, excuse me. Hi, Mac, how are you doing?
Hi, Neil. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was, I first came across some of your work when I was, looking at interviews, and then, Sarah K. Ramsey, who's been a guest twice on this podcast, I saw your appearance on there, and I'm like, oh my God, we got to have him on. And then when we started researching, it's like, because this is what this podcast is all about. We try to create hope and awareness for anything related to mental health, and your work, your organization, your book, and everything you do. It fits that to the T, right? So that's why we wanted you on. So yeah, let's start a little. We'll get into masculinity and what that means and what it should mean. But before we do that, can you talk a little bit about your background and how you got started in this area of interest?
Well, I have had a crazy ride of life, I would say. I was born in the Bible Belt in the South, and I was born, what I say, the magic letter that we get in life, which is a letter someone puts on a piece of paper when you're born in the hospital. They take a look at a baby and they put this letter on a piece of paper. And this letter actually follows you the rest of your life, and it has huge implications on your life. Most people never really think about it, right?
Yeah,
but
right.
Yeah, but it has implications on your safety in the world, on the opportunities you will be offered or not, the amount of money you can make in your life, and we can just go on and on, right? It's just,
right. Yeah.
There's so much to it. And in my first test of life, they gave me an F. And at 4 years old, I realized that the feminine name I was given at birth didn't fit me. And I started changing my name to a masculine name, playing with other kids. I didn't even know what to call what I felt. I just knew I felt what they were telling me didn't fit.
Yeah. And I believe your one of your masculine names that you adopted was taken from Gunsmoke, I think, if I read that correctly.
Yeah, when I was 4, my mom had me at 16, so my grandparents helped raise me. And my grandfather was just a great role model for me and a wonderful man in many ways. And him and I had a couple of shows that we watched every week, like Clockwork and Gunsmoke and Bonanza. Those were the 2 shows. And and I told the kids in the neighborhood that my name was Matt Dillon, the sheriff in Gunsmoke, which my grandparents thought it was really cute when kids would come knock on the door, ask if Matt Dillon could come out and play.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd imagine. Yeah.
I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. I just knew that what they were telling me didn't fit who I was. And the only way I knew as a little kid to express it was to change my name to something that I felt fit better.
Right. And that's what I was going to ask. And I asked this question, which I don't know if it's going to sound insensitive to some people listening or watching. And I asked this simply to educate myself better, right, on the matter, not being a transgender person. And you explained that you didn't know how to quite put it. What I was going to ask is, what does a person go through when they feel, when they're young and they're classified, like you said, biologically as one gender, but they know, okay, from inside, it's not true. Something is wrong here. And what I was going to ask is, I don't even know if there's a definitive answer for this, is what is that feeling like? Is it just intuitive? Is it from inside? Is it physically different? That's what again, I ask this not to like offend anybody or just to educate myself better on what exactly that feels like.
Yeah, I don't think it's offensive to ask questions. I'm an educator, so I always put myself out that you can ask anything because I want to create understanding, right?
Yeah.
It feels like you don't fit the mold of what people are trying to tell you you're supposed to fit. And so you're just struggling to be you. And to figure out how to navigate that. That's what I felt personally.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, I wouldn't say that my experience is the exact same as every other transgender person, of course. But yeah, I think most trans people though do fit, that they're trying to find the way to navigate this crazy binary system to just be who they are. And that can be very difficult.
Yeah. And I know that especially in this day and age where there's so much turmoil and chaos going on. And so let's start with, the hot topic and the, area of interest that you focus on, masculinity. But what I'd like to do is ask you to define it in two ways, what it really is and what, according to you, it should be.
Well, what it is a good question. And I've been, when I started Positive Masculinity, the nonprofit, with a good friend of mine over 4 years ago now, we started it as a men's and masculine discussion group where masculine people can gather together and have a safe container to talk about how these things have affected our lives and how just to grow and be better people and hopefully create a healthier model. And one of the questions we've put out to that group ever since we started is define masculinity without talking about any body part.
Interesting.
And we've yet to get someone to come up with something that sticks. And the reason is because it's a made up concept, right?
Ooh, good point. Yeah.
So everything that someone in the group has come up with, someone else in the group will say, like someone will say, well, masculine people are more mechanically minded. For instance, they're talking about characteristics to masculinity, right? And then another person in the group will go, yeah, but my Aunt Jane can fix anything. She's the one in the family that can fix anything. Right? So there's always somebody to debunk it. Like this is not just a masculine thing.
Right. Exactly. Right. I always say, because they always say, well, men can do this, but then you always find the opposite of that. Like, well, I know women who do this too, and I know men who do this, which normally. So it's like, where does that line? Yeah. Right. It's always. Yeah. So. Yeah. So then, where do you think this whole perception, is it because of just at the beginning of the world, somebody decided this is the way it is, and these are the gender rules of society? How did this all begin? Do you think it's what people are taught? Is it what, wrong education in school regarding people skills? Where does all this begin, of all the stereotypical things that we associate both masculinity as well as across all genders, female, men, everyone?
Yeah. Well, I think there are some physical attributes, now I'm going back to, I said, without talking about body parts, but when we started getting roles and gender expectations, we're talking back in the hunter-gatherer days, and physically people that are born, as men do have some physical strength that is different naturally. Now, it's not that women can't develop that. For
exactly,
sure.
Right. It's just not naturally born in some women, but doesn't mean it can't be. Yeah,
exactly. So I mean, there were some jobs then and expectations that came with that, like hunting and protecting and things like that came with that because of those attributes, those physical attributes. But then the rest of it, when we're talking about gender expectations in our society today, where we're not having to run out hunt for our food every day, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
and you know, protect from bears coming in the tent and things like that.
Hopefully not.
Right. Hopefully. Yeah. Although some camping, you might have to do that.
Yeah.
But in a normal societal daily life, this stuff is been constructed, these binary models, by the people in charge to keep us all in our lane.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about when society started to organize, honestly, the old white straight cis men in power wanted to keep their power, and so they made these binary categories to keep everybody in line. And if you didn't fit what they wanted, I mean, you look at the rich, the poor, the haves, the have-nots, the black, the white. You know, you can go on and on about these binary systems. You know, male and female. They're designed to pit one against the other. Right? In fact, when you talk about the truth of binary systems, I can't even define masculinity without femininity in a binary system, because I can't. Part of my definition is that I'm the opposite of that.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite of the other, right? It's the same with rich, poor. How do you define them? Well, I'm the opposite of the other, right?
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. Because it's like, what is, if we go by the rich poor example, it's like, what is rich and what is poor? And even with masculinity and femininity, it's like, okay, well, that's too feminine. But who said so? It's like, who made that rule, right? So I totally get it. Yeah. So I know that you're a big advocate. You've talked about this a lot in the school system and you know, where we get our basic education and things like that. But one thing we don't get is the people skills. And I know you've talked about that, real life skills and things like that. So what are some of the biggest changes that, you know, should be taught in school that you think that are not as of now?
Well, I mean, you know, we learn the basics of English and math and science. I mean, some people, I guess, didn't pay attention in science class. We can see from our society. But,
good point. Very good point.
And obviously, they've controlled the history we learn to a very narrow window. The history they want us to know, right?
Yeah.
But the life skills part, no matter what job you do or who you are in the world, you need to have skills of how to communicate well. You need to have skills of how to deal with difficult situations, decisions, and difficult people. You know, you need to have skills to understand how to make a budget, a basic budget to run, you know, your household. I mean, just basic things that help people navigate life, right? How to set a goal and follow through. You know, these are things that they just basic life skills, that it doesn't matter what kind of a job you have. Also, understanding that people different than us are not a threat to us. That is huge to me. In fact, you know, they enhance our lives and enrich our lives because we're getting a broader perspective and understanding of things.
Right.
Yeah. One of the privileges I've had is traveling the world. Partly because I started martial arts at 6, was on the U.S. karate team by the time I was 17, and had the privilege of starting to travel to compete all over the place. And you know, I can say there's no better education than traveling and meeting people from different cultures, getting to experience different cultures. I mean, it gives you such a rich appreciation for people that are different and for how this is a global world. You know, that's another thing that I think we need to teach in school, is it's not nation against nation. We live on one globe, and if we don't work together to take care of it and take care of each other, you know, we're not going to make it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think we're all human race here. And, you know, people forget that.
And these differences that people worry about, right? Scientifically, they've proven they're like a fingernail. They're like such a minor part of our DNA. And we have so much to learn from one another. One of the beautiful things, about getting to spend time with people in other cultures is, I would say, some of the best life lessons I've learned is from diving into their culture and talking to them about the things they've learned in their culture that are different than mine.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what, in the beginning, that's what I was like trying to get into, is like, well, let's learn about this rather than I don't know. Let me admit I don't know and try to learn. And right, that's what we all need to do about things that we don't understand or don't know about.
And there you go. There's one of the messages around masculinity that is difficult, is masculine people are given the message that we're supposed to act like we've got all the answers, right? So it's really hard to admit we don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask you, what's the biggest thing that you take issue with that is supposed to be in masculinity, but it should not be?
Yeah.
It?
That's a huge one. Because nobody has all of the answers, right? If any of us are honest, and have any sense of reality, none of us have all the answers. And we all need to learn and be a student forever. I mean, even if you have a lot of knowledge in one area, that doesn't mean you have knowledge in all areas, right?
Right. Exactly. Because some people would say the pessimistic side would have you believe, well, look at where we are. Look at the toxic environment the world is in. Look at how split we are, even amongst ourselves and families. There's political debates there, and people get into wars and just, over the smallest things that in the long run don't matter. So what is your outlook on that? Is it going to take a lot of work? Are you optimistic? Where do you stand on?
Well, I have to admit, I'm a forever optimist, which is which is helpful in being an activist and an educator.
I'm sure, yeah, yeah. No, I'm sure, because it's the last thing you want, right? Is somebody in your position to say, oh, "Okay, I give up. I can't. How can we ever come back from?" You don't want that. We need people like you, Mac. We need them. Trust me. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that no one, there were few people having these conversations before, especially when you talk about our socialization, our social conditioning around gender. Very few people were having these conversations. So I think this is a newer conversation. And every time I'm invited somewhere to speak or teach on it, I see the light bulbs go on. I see people realizing. One of the things I do is I get men and masculine people to realize that toxic masculinity and the patriarchy have hurt and limited us too.
Yeah.
That's how you get men on board, in my opinion, with understanding this isn't healthy for any of us.
That's one of the main things I was going to ask. When you say positive masculinity, what are some of the aspects that you really, really try to put out there with your organization and everything else that you do?
Yeah. I'll read you the tagline from my book, because that's the best definition to me of what positive masculinity is. It's a heart-led guide for growth toward a conscious, emotionally intelligent, and inclusive masculinity. And when I say inclusive masculinity, that's huge, because the old traditional model of masculinity was even exclusive to a lot of men. If you didn't fit into certain box, like if you weren't the tough guy, if you didn't have physical prowess, for instance, you'd fit in, right? If you were more artsy or more intellectual, you didn't really fit in.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, I mean, you think about guys even like Fred Rogers, the amazing man Fred Rogers, he wouldn't have fit into that traditional tough guy John Wayne model, right? So I imagine he got picked on. I imagine he got picked on as a teenage boy. Can you imagine that?
I bet, right.
Yeah, so I mean, when I say inclusive, I mean even among the world of masculinity itself. Men being inclusive of the different forms of masculinity.
Right.
Yeah, my friend Drew and I, who started this, we call it masculinities, because we believe there's so many different ways to be masculine or feminine. There's not one way to be either one, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah. I can tell you just from a quick personal experience, I I've always grown up believing myself as, like, whether you term it as feminist or whatever, that all genders are equal. Never discriminate in the workplace, in your love life, all across society, women, men, everybody. And yet, when, like, I went through an experience in college where I was sexually harassed by a female, we were both in our 20s. As the male, I questioned myself. Did this just happen or did I just imagine it? Even though I consider myself modern and liberal minded and everything, it
Yeah.
was like, if I tell this to someone, I don't believe me. So I totally get that there are so many areas. It's not just one, right? It's so many that we need to learn. It's all encompassing.
It's true. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, thanks for sharing that story, because that's a vulnerable story. And it's so true, because that's that conditioning you had that made you question that. Besides, having to hold up the know-it-all mask, I call it the different man masks that we have to hold up.
Yeah.
One of the other ones that I think would help us to be able to shed and put down the mask of being competitive all the time. And I mean, men are taught that everything's a competition, right? It's the king of the hill. It's the king of the hill game all the time, that we have to conquer someone else in order for us to be successful.
Yeah.
Right? And believe me, that's a crazy one for me, because I'm a world-class competitor, right? I'm a retired
martial artist. Yeah.
I mean, world champion, martial artist in the Martial Arts Hall of Fame. So I believe there are some benefits to competition at times, because it does help us strive to be better.
Right.
But when competition is out of balance and we think we have to do it all the time, 24/7, and it stops us from being collaborative.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I think it does many times. The messaging we get in masculinity is compete, take someone else down, instead of let's work together and how much stronger can we be? How much more can we accomplish? I think that's when it becomes bad, because it's totally out of balance there.
That would also apply, right, in everyday walks of life, not just in sports or physical competition, because it's like, I've heard of examples where, like, a marriage was going fine till somebody told the dad, like, why are you letting your wife do that?
Yeah, and we certainly see it in business, in the corporate world too, right?
Right.
I'll step on whoever I need to step on to climb the ladder. And then I think the other big one is the rigidity or the stoicism that we're taught around masculinity, that we're not supposed to show emotion, that we're supposed to be stoic all the time, supposed to act like we always have it together. And yet we were all created to be emotional beings.
Right.
And that is something that has harmed us as masculine people. It's really stunted our growth. It's stunted our emotional intelligence. It's hurt our relationships. It's kept us from even creating healthy friendships, because we're not real with each other, because we're not willing to embrace vulnerability, because we're told that's a woman's thing. It's not.
Right? It's that phrase of, why are you crying like a little girl? Well, who says only little girls cry? That's right. Everybody cries, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, I'll give you a quote from my book around that. I kind of compare a lot of things in the book to my knowledge from over 50 years as a martial artist, right? There's a lot of lessons I learned through that are life's lessons, right? I say it's important to examine all areas of our lives to find rigidity and to root it out. Physically, when we are rigid, that translates to being inflexible. And we get injured much easier. As an athlete, I know that being rigid is not a healthy thing, right? It's something where it can cause me a lot of injury. And so the same can happen emotionally if we're rigid. So
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
It's something for us.
That.
One of the things I challenge the guys to do in our positive masculinity monthly discussion group, which is free, by the way, it's virtual. People can join from anywhere. And we have a different discussion topic each month. But one of the things one of the things I challenge them to do is, when we feel our body tense up in reaction to something someone says or does, right? We feel that jaw tighten, the shoulders, the neck.
Yeah.
we start getting curious about that and asking questions in ourselves as to what's behind that reaction. And that helps us get to know ourselves, right? And figuring out what's triggering that rigidity. And
how did you first conceive the idea of writing this book, and how did that all come about?
Yeah. Well, Drew and I, my buddy and I were running this. I came up with this idea around the Me Too movement. It was going on. I was watching it, right? And I was noticing that there weren't a lot of men involved in the conversation, with the exception of the few handfuls of men that were fighting back from people calling out the toxic behavior of men over, years and years, right?
Right.
But other than that, there weren't men like involved in the conversation as to how can we make this better, right?
Yeah.
So I thought we need to be involved in this, and we need to also realize that these systems, this patriarchy and toxic masculinity, like I said before, has hurt and limited us. And so I called my good friend, who a fellow activist, and we had done a lot of activist work together. And I knew he had grown up with a toxic masculine father. So I knew he got this, right? So I said to him, I got this idea about us starting this men's discussion group around this, and I had this vision, or download from the universe, whatever you call it, of all kinds of different types of men and masculine people from different ages, different ethnic backgrounds, different life experiences, right? Coming together to talk about this and to start to dismantle the old model and try to recreate something healthier. And I shared this with Drew and said, would you be willing to do this work with me? And he was like, hell yes, let's do it. I think this is so important, And so him and I started this. And we actually started the book together. And then he had been battling cancer for years. And unfortunately, about a year and a half ago, my friend passed away from cancer.
Oh, sorry about that.
48 years old. So, yeah.
So you're doing your part more than many other people to raise this awareness. What can we do as people outside looking into people such as yourself? What can we do to do the same to raise awareness?
Start having conversations with those in your life about these things. I think there's a lot of good, decent men in the world, and there's a lot of also supportive women that want, to move all of this forward as well. And I think the problem is that not enough good people are as loud as the other people that are trying to cause damage, right? So I think more good people with good intentions need to speak up and speak out to their friends and just not be so timid about it. I do think it would make a difference if the men who are survivors would speak up more. It's Domestic Violence Awareness Month right now. And yeah, it's one in nine face domestic violence of some sort. So, and yet still the biggest predator to women is men, Yeah. And so we also have to look at that, and how can the good men in the world help do something that creates a positive difference in that? I do think that men have dealt with abuse. Speaking up is huge. I have some friends that have had sexual abuse when they were young, and they've, been courageous enough to speak up about it. And I know that makes a huge difference. It also helps other men be able to speak up when they see a man speak up, right?
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I'm passionate about this work, you probably know this, is the highest suicide rate is among middle-aged men.
Yeah.
There's a very high depression rate, very high suicide rate. And the reason, I believe a lot of the reason is because we're taught forever, since you're very little, not to talk about your feelings, to stuff them down, right? And to hold them in. And they're going to come out one way or another, right? And sometimes they come out in anger. Sometimes they come out in self-harm, whether it be addiction or, suicide. groups or like that. And unfortunately, some people take it out on those in their inner circle and in the world, because they haven't been taught good skills on how to deal with it.
And also,
sometimes you're taught across all cultures, East, West, or wherever in the whole universe, that they're not corrected from a very young age, right? Sometimes you see that little boys playing something that is not, they shouldn't be saying or they shouldn't be doing, but it's like boys will be boys, and
Right.
that kind of mentality, and that just feeds into it more, right, as they grow older.
Right. Well, what are the acceptable emotions that men and masculine people are allowed to have? I mean, let's think about it, right? It's being angry, assertive, right? Frustrated, powerful. Those are emotions that we're allowed to have. We're not allowed to show sadness, grief, tenderness, none of that, right? I don't know if you have heard me tell the story of my stepson, and I took him to the dentist when he was 13. He was a very tall kid for his age. He always has been. He's a tall kid. And his mom was working, so I had to take him, and he was getting prepped for braces, so he's going to get a tooth pulled. And it was his first tooth getting pulled. And of course, I mean, anybody's nervous that going to the dentist, right, and getting a tooth pulled. So the female dental assistant walks us into the little room, puts him in the pediatric dental chair, which he kind of hangs over because he's long and lanky. And before the dentist ever gets in the room, he's given the chair the death grip because he's nervous. Okay. And the female dental assistant looked at him and said, "You're a big boy, toughen up." Well, little did she know, what his stepdad does, right? So I stood up very respectfully, though, and I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, his mom and I don't raise him that way." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "We raise him so that he can express his fears and his emotions. We don't teach him to hold all that in." And she just looked at me like, whoa. We are getting ready to launch at positivemasculinitynow.org. We are getting ready to launch October 1st an essay contest. We have different age categories. And here's what we're going to, the subject matter that we're asking people to write on is a positive masculine role model in your life and how they've impacted your life. What we're trying, and people of any gender can write these essays. This is not limited at all by gender. This is just, we have age categories because different age categories have different word counts for the essay, of course. We have some amazing judges that will be college professors and all kinds of cool people, gender studies professors that are going to be actually helping judge this. And we're very excited to launch our first annual essay contest. Part of what we're trying to do with this is get people, most of what we hear about masculinity in the world and in the news when we turn on the TV is the negative. We're trying to get people to look at what there are good men out there and tell us about them, right? And then hopefully that inspires people to step up and want to be that kind of role model.
Yes, that's important. Very true. And what's the date for this?
The essay contest, you can enter from October 1st to December 1st, and then we'll announce the winners by the first of the year.
Can you go over some of the things you do in the Positive Masculinity program?
Yeah, we have the monthly discussion group every second Tuesday of the month. And on our website, you can get more information about that, and you can email us to join that group. And we do it on Zoom, so it's virtual, so people can join from anywhere. We're going to keep that even as a hybrid model because, we went hybrid like a lot of people. We went to online like a lot of people did during the pandemic. Now we have people joining from everywhere, so we're going to keep that model. And also teach workshops. We teach workshops at corporations, at faith communities, at different groups. We'll come teach a workshop on, and all of our workshops are listed there on the website as well. And this helps move this conversation forward. Like one of the workshops I teach is how to create healthy masculine friendships.
Give us the name of the website. I believe it's just positivemasculinity.com, right? Good and simple.
It's positivemasculinitynow.org.
Oh, now.org. Okay, remember that, folks.
The name of the book is the same, Positive Masculinity Now, yes.
Okay. All right, we will link that. Well, Mac, thank you so much for this discussion. And we could probably talk for hours, but as I always say, if only time didn't get in the way. So,
Right.
but hopefully in future we will have many such discussions, and explore as many areas of this issue as we, because there can never be enough, right? It can never. Right. Yeah. So.
Sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and have a great day. And we look forward to talking to you again in the near future.
Definitely. Thanks, Neil.